Hello, everyone. I'm Nehemiah Frank, founder and editor-in-chief of the Black Wall Street Times, and this is the Smitherin Report.
I named this weekly vlog after A.J. Smitherman, who was a pioneer of black news media in the early 20th century. He was the founder and editor-in-chief at Tulsa Star until it was burnt to the ground during the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Some white Tulsans believed that A.J. Smitherman was a troublemaker, stirring up racial tension in his black-owned publication. But to me, he was a hero. He fought white supremacy with the stroke of his pen and helped educate black people on the power of voting and reshaped public opinion. Today, we stand on his shoulders.
Julius Jones was just 19 when Paul Howe, a white insurance executive, was fatally shot in Edmond, Oklahoma, in an affluent suburb north of Oklahoma City in 1999. He's maintained his innocence for the past 22 years while sitting on death row in an Oklahoma prison. Last month, in a historic vote, Oklahoma's Pardon and Parole Board recommended life and the possibility of parole for Julius Jones. A week later, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals scheduled Jones's execution date on November 18th, despite the board's recommendation. And just when you think the stormy clouds couldn't get any darker, Oklahoma's Governor Kevin Stitt issued the following statement, quote, "I am not accepting a Pardon and Parole Board's recommendation to commute the sentence of Julius Jones because a clemency hearing, not a commutation hearing, is the appropriate venue for our state to consider death row cases," end quote. The governor went on to say, "Clemency hearings are more intensive and thorough than commutation hearings and include the option for the inmate to speak publicly before the Pardon and Parole Board, as well as the victim's family and attorneys from both sides," adding, "The precedent in Oklahoma is for death row inmates to receive the clemency hearings to which they are entitled prior to their execution date," end quote. According to the EJI, since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976, there has been one innocent person for every 9 persons executed. At Jones's commutation hearing, board chairman Adam Lux said at the hearing, quote, "Personally, I believe in the death penalty cases. There should be no doubt. And put simply, I have doubts about this case," end quote. And so do 6 million people who have signed a petition calling for Jones's clemency and that his sentence be commuted. His case has gained national attention, receiving help from Kim Kardashian, Viola Davis, and other high-profile celebrities. Last week, Jones's family members were on Dr. Oz and The Real. The week before that, they appeared on Dateline and The Late Show with James Corden. Surely the whole world isn't advocating for a guilty person to be sentenced to death. There are a lot of smart Americans who are advocating for the humanity of Jones because there is too much doubt in this case to send this man to the death chamber. Since Julius's commutation hearing, where again the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board recommended life with the possibility of parole, more energy has been sadly directed at proving why Julius Jones is guilty and should receive the death sentence. We know that Christopher Jordan, Julius's childhood friend, was profiled by at least 2 witnesses and at the scene of the crime. One of the eyewitnesses stated in court, quote, "One of the people in the car, I believe it was the driver, had cornrows in their hair. And I think one of them had a white shirt, like a white t-shirt maybe on," end quote. Now follow along with me. Miss Toby Paul Howe's sister is the key witness of the murder. In 1999, she gave a description of the person who murdered her brother. When asked by an attorney, quote, "From what you could see of the gunman, can you tell if he had cornrows or not?" Miss Toby answered, "No." For clarity, the attorney asks, "No, he didn't," or "You couldn't tell." Miss Toby's first response was, quote, "The hat was covering his head," adding, "They weren't above his ears. There was just a small amount of hair sticking out about half an inch above his ears." So the statement's a little confusing. The attorney then asks, "So could you see braids or not?" Miss Toby replies, "No, I could not see braids," end quote. Miss Toby wouldn't have been able to get a good look at the murderer because 1, it was nighttime, and 2, she was trying to get her nieces, Paul Howe's children, out of the back of the vehicle into safety. She mentioned rescuing her nieces at the commutation hearing last month. The murderer was described as having a red bandana covering his face and a hat. She would have been able to see that. And she would have been able to see a small amount of hair sticking out about half an inch above the criminal's ears. She couldn't describe much beyond that, though, which becomes the very thing that should have exonerated Julius Jones. Sadly, Jones's attorneys had never tried a capital case and admitted on camera to his incompetence. And so did the other attorney who said that she was still in law school at the time of Jones's trial. Law school. The profile difference between the type of hairstyle Julius Jones had versus what Christopher Jordan had was never argued in court by Julius's attorneys. Recently, a YouTuber made a video arguing why Julius Jones is 100% guilty. One of the arguments he made was about Miss Toby's recent arguments that she was misunderstood when describing the murderer's hair by those in the media and the Pardon and Parole Board.
He wanted me to change my testimony. He even sent me pictures of himself and Christopher Jordan at the time. And what it made me realize, Christopher Jordan had cornrows at the time.
One of the most significant details of the night of the murder was Megan's description of the killer's hair.
His stocking cap was so tight on his head, I know I would have seen the cornrows underneath because the top of his hat was smooth.
Jones did not have cornrows. Jordan did.
He wanted me to point the finger at Christopher Jordan. That's why he sent the pictures. And he wanted me to say it wasn't him.
And although that description, Megan says, has been misconstrued, her testimony never changed.
There was a small amount of hair showing from the top of his ears to his stocking cap, about a half an inch I could see, meaning there was a half an inch from the top of his ear to his stocking cap. They have said, I have said that he had a half an inch to an inch long hair and it was sticking out. Now they are saying I said the shooter had inch long hair, and that's not what I said.
Even in this interview, Miss Toby is describing Jordan, even when she tries to point her multifaceted testimony at Julius. Because in 1999, she stated that the murderer had a hat, but in a recent interview, she stated that she would have been able to see the cornrows if the murderer had them. And as an African-American man who used to have cornrows when he had hair and has seen the hairstyle rocked quite frequently in his community, I can tell Miss Howe that she wouldn't have been able to tell. If the murderer was rocking cornrows and had a fitted hat/cap on, she wouldn't have been able to see the cornrows on the top of his head. If he were wearing a wave cap, stocking cap, or regular fitted hat, she wouldn't have been able to tell. But what she would have been able to see was the hair sticking an inch from beneath whatever was on the murderer's head. I'm certain the DNA was planted on the red bandana when Christopher Jordan stayed the night at Julius's house the night he killed Paul Howe. Could Christopher Jordan have wiped Julius Jones's pillowcase with the red bandana? According to Julius, Christopher Jordan slept in Julius's bedroom while Julius slept on the couch that night. Furthermore, how could the police have known where to look for the murder weapon and bandana? Notably, additional DNA found on the bandana is consistent with a mixture of 3 or more individuals, which undoubtedly puts major holes in David Prater's claims that Julius is still guilty. The question that should be asked is, does the evidence match the other person who was described wearing the white t-shirt? Has Liddell King's DNA been compared to the red bandana? The YouTuber then argued that Miss Toby was talking about the murderer's sideburns.
So what Paul Howe's sister is actually describing there, and by the way, she says this to this day, is hair coming 1.5 inches around the ears. This is also known as a sideburn. She was specifically asked if she was referring to braids or cornrows. She said no. What she saw was 1 inch of hair.
Let me show you the photo of Julius Jones and Christopher Jordan again. Even the YouTuber described Christopher Jordan, even if he didn't want to. All evidence still points towards Christopher Jordan as the murderer. From the photo, you can clearly see that Christopher Jordan has hair that would have stuck out about 1/2 inch above his ears. Julius Jones had a fade, a popular African-American hairstyle that is far less than even 1/2 inch from the scalp. The Frontier reports Christopher Jordan, Julius Jones's co-defendant in the 1999 slaying of Edmond businessman Paul Howe, admitted in prison to killing Howe and letting Jones take the fall for the crime, according to an inmate who served time in an Oklahoma prison with Jordan. The revelation was made last year in a series of letters and video interviews between Arkansas's inmate Roderick Wesley and Jones's attorneys, who are seeking to free Jones, or at least remove him from Oklahoma's death row. Here's the video.
And Jordan had worked together over there at the store at Brickers. And it was just, like I said, one day we sitting there and I'm telling him about my situation. He pretty much told me about his, because at the time I didn't even know he had the murder charge, you know what I'm saying? So it was pretty much like, I guess you could say he was at the time being sort of remorseful, but it was one of them cases where I'm sorry, but I'm not gonna jump out there and just, throw myself to the wolves like that.
Sure.
And so when he ended up breaking it down, it was pretty much like, yeah, I committed the act, you know what I'm saying, that somebody else is getting accused of, And like I said, basically when I saw it on TV, it was a big decision is, do I jump out there or what? But I looked at it as, if it was my situation, I would want somebody who has information to go ahead and do that, because this is man's life on the line. And like I said, it was just, I just remember us having a conversation that he admitted that he the one basically got the murder charge, did the killing, and it wasn't this guy, So, I mean, that's really was about it, you know what I'm saying? As far as like, I can't sit here and say he went into details about this and this and that, but I can't sit here and say he did admit to me that it was him who killed the guy, you know what I'm saying?
My point is, there are surely too many holes in this case to risk killing an innocent person. And like so many others across the country, I wrote an open letter to Governor Kevin Stitt asking that he grant clemency to Julius and to the rest of the men on Oklahoma's death row. Notably, the majority of men scheduled to be executed by the state of Oklahoma are Black. My letter reads,
"The moment you refuse these men's requests for clemency and commute their sentences so they can live out the remainder of their earthly punishment in a prison cell, but above ground for allegedly being a murderer, you will become responsible for their deaths. You will become complicit in state-sanctioned murder. Why? It was God who showed the first act of clemency on this planet to Adam and Eve's son, sending Cain into the wilderness for murdering his brother Abel. Moreover, no law under heaven is greater than that which Jesus exemplified when he said, quote, 'He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her.' End quote. John chapter 8, verse 7. Hence, their test in faith and God's will for their lives is just as much a test for you, Governor Stitt, to make the right decision. Remember, Moses' earthly law was overthrown by Jesus' compassion for humanity when Jesus prevented the community leaders from putting a prostitute to death. So here's the most morally profound question you'll ever receive as a Christian and as a state governor. As it relates to the death row inmates, how do you compare to God's compassion for Cain and Jesus' sympathy for the prostitute if you sign off on their death sentences? It is unlikely that Jesus or God would want you to sign off on any of the executions scheduled under your governorship, because no person living today is without sin. And it seems that a merciful God would want you to grant clemency and commute the sentences of every single one of them. I know this decision is difficult, and I'm sure you know this decision is non-political, as David Prater is a Democrat pushing for the death penalty for a seemingly innocent man, which I, as a kid raised in an Assemblies of God church, am against. And so are the other conservatives who are asking for you to grant clemency to Julius Jones. Concerning Julius Jones's case, there's doubt, so much doubt, as you're aware, that our state's Pardon and Parole Board recommended that his sentence be commuted. Their decision aggravated Mr. David Prater, and I can assure you no lover of God would push for the execution of Mr. Jones so harshly with this much doubt in his case. And no lover of God would be so adamant on removing Pardon and Parole Board members simply because they, like Jesus, seemingly have more compassion and empathy. I therefore question Prater's motives. Is his goal to avenge for the murdered victim and their families, or is he seeking vanity? The Bible says that it is God's right alone to avenge the death of these murdered victims, and his alone to deliver the ultimate wrath to these alleged murderers in eternity. We must remember Proverbs 11:9, quote, "With his mouth the godless man would destroy his neighbor, but by knowledge the righteous are delivered," End quote. The knowledge that Amanda Bass so eloquently presented at Mr. Jones's Pardon and Parole Board hearing was convincing. She presented such persuasive and solid knowledge about that case that I became more and more doubtful that Julius Jones ever met Paul Howe in person. After reviewing court documents myself, I'm convinced that Liddell King was the driver and Christopher Jordan was the man who murdered Paul Howe. Christopher Jordan should be spending the rest of his life behind bars, not Julius Jones. According to the EJI, since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976, there has been one innocent person for every 9 who have been executed. So to kill any of these men would be taking too great a chance at killing an innocent person. To kill an innocent man and sentence him to life without parole would equally be a great evil. I'll be praying for your decision, the state of Oklahoma, and the nation. And my spirit tells me that the soul of Oklahoma and America is heavily weighted on your decision, whether to grant clemency to these broken men and to Julius Jones.